They put my daughter on a stage and tried to sell her like cattle. Right there in the middle of town, under the fancy chandeliers with all the so-called respectable folks watching. Her name is Elizabeth, and she stood there in a green silk dress that must have cost more than our entire ranch. Her back was straight, her head was high, but I saw it. I saw the tremor in her hands, the same hands that had cooked our meals, mended our clothes, and held mine when her mother passed 5 years back. The man running the show was Marshall Crawford, a snake in a tailored suit who owned the bank, the town, and pretty much everyone in it. And he wanted to own my daughter, too. He called it an engagement announcement, a celebration, but we all knew what it was. It was a foreclosure of a different kind. He held up his hand, smiling like a wolf looking at a lamb. The bidding, he said, his voice slick with poison, starts at $5,000. That was the exact amount I owed him. The price of our home, the price of 3 generations of blood and sweat soaked into the Dakota soil. I tried to move, to shout, to tear the whole damn place apart with my bare hands. But 2 of Crawford's thugs held me back, their grips like iron. I could only watch as my whole world, my only child, was put on the auction block. And in that moment, I knew we were lost. What none of us knew was that salvation was about to walk through the door. And he wasn't coming with a Bible. It all started 30 days earlier. The sun was a merciless hammer on the cracked earth of our ranch. 6 years of drought had bled us dry. The foreclosure notice from Crawford's bank felt heavier than a tombstone in my hand. 30 days, $5,000, an impossible sum. When I told Elizabeth, she didn't cry. She just stood there at the kitchen window, her reflection a pale ghost against the dying land. She looked at our last few head of cattle, the worn-out furniture, the few pieces of her mother's jewelry we had left. She knew, just like I did, that it wouldn't be enough, not even close. "We'll find a way, Pa," she said, but her voice was thin, brittle as a dry leaf. The silence that followed was louder than any storm. That silence was the sound of the end. I rode into Clearwater a few days later, my pride a lead weight in my gut. I had a desperate plan, a small parcel of land east of the ranch with a natural spring on it. It wasn't much, but in a land dying of thirst, water was worth more than gold. I walked into Crawford's bank, a palace of marble and polished wood built on the backs of broken men like me. Crawford was waiting in his office, swirling brandy in a crystal glass. He didn't even stand up. He listened to my offer for the eastern parcel, a smirk playing on his thin lips. Then he waved his hand, dismissing my last hope like it was a fly. "That pittance of land isn't worth half what you owe," he said. My heart sank. "Then what do you suggest?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He rose from his chair, walking to the window that overlooked the whole town. "I've been thinking about a different kind of arrangement," he said, turning back to me. His eyes were cold, like a winter river. "Your daughter, Elizabeth, she's unmarried, isn't she?" I felt the blood freeze in my veins. "My daughter is not part of this discussion. But she could be the solution," he purred, moving closer. "I'm a widower. I find myself in need of a wife. A beautiful, respectable wife. Marry her to me, and your debts are forgiven." I stood so fast my chair crashed to the floor. "You're asking me to sell my own daughter?" His expression hardened. "I'm suggesting a marriage that would save your family legacy. She would want for nothing. Your ranch would be safe." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Refuse, and you lose everything. I'll see you and your daughter begging on the street. What can you offer her, Thomas? Poverty? Hardship? I'm offering her security." I stumbled out of that bank, his words burning a hole in my soul. I knew what I should do. Tell him to go to hell. But the image of Elizabeth, homeless and destitute, it was a nightmare I couldn't face. That night, I told her. The porch was dark, the only light from the sliver of a moon. When the words left my mouth, the silence came again, heavier and more terrible than before. "Crawford is almost 50, she finally said. Her voice was so quiet I could barely hear it. "And his first wife, they say—" We both knew the rumors, that she hadn't just died, that she'd been found at the bottom of a ravine with bruises on her arms. I told him no, I said quickly. Of course, I told him no. We'll find another way. But the days bled into one another, and no other way appeared. Every door I knocked on was closed. Every neighbor was struggling just as bad as we were. I saw the hope drain from my daughter's eyes, replaced by a grim resolve I knew all too well. It was her mother's resolve, the kind that could face down a blizzard or a wolf pack without flinching. On the 15th day, she walked into the kitchen as I was staring at the calendar. I'll do it, she said. I'll marry him. Absolutely not, I roared, slamming my fist on the table. I would rather lose everything. It's my choice, she said, her voice shaking but firm. This ranch is our home. It's all we have left of Mother. I won't let it be taken from us. I saw the sacrifice in her eyes, the love that was willing to condemn herself to save me. And it broke me. I rode back to Crawford, a defeated man. I tried to bargain, to make the arrangement seem less like a sale. A formal engagement announcement, I insisted, at a gathering, not some backroom deal. Crawford agreed, a triumphant glint in his eye. He saw it for what it was, a public display of his power. He was not just taking my land, he was taking my daughter, and he wanted everyone to watch. Meanwhile, miles away, in a hidden valley the white man's maps didn't show, a different council was taking place. A Lakota warrior named Swift River listened as the elders spoke of broken treaties and the coming winter. The soldiers were closing in, pushing them toward the reservations, where a proud people went to die slowly. Swift River was a man of two worlds. His mother was Lakota, his father a white scout who had chosen to live with his mother's people. He could walk in the white man's world, speak their language, even use their laws against them. But his heart was with the Lakota. He knew they needed medicine, supplies. He knew he would have to go to Clearwater. Be careful, an elder named Grey Wolf warned him. They may see your father's blood, but they will only hate you for your mother's. Swift River knew the truth of those words. He carried the scars to prove it. He rode into Clearwater dressed in settler's clothes, a ghost moving through a town that both needed and despised him. After trading his furs, he was about to leave when he heard two men talking outside the saloon. Crawford's finally got his claws into the Hayes place, one said. Taking the daughter as payment, I hear. The other man whistled. Elizabeth Hayes. Heard he's not given her a choice in the matter. Some kind of big announcement tomorrow night. An auction, some are calling it. Invitation only. Crawford showing off his new prize. Swift River froze. He knew Thomas Hayes. Years ago, during a harsh winter, Hayes had allowed his band to hunt on the edge of his property. A small kindness in a world of cruelty, but the Lakota do not forget such things. The idea of a woman being traded like property, forced into a deal to settle a debt, it struck a deep, discordant chord in him. It was a violation of every code he lived by. He mounted his horse, but instead of riding back to his people, he turned toward the darkening plains. He would go to this announcement. He would watch, and if the spirits willed it, he would act. He couldn't know that his decision was about to set the entire territory on fire. The night of the party, our old wagon felt like a funeral carriage. Elizabeth sat beside me, silent and regal in that emerald dress Crawford had sent. It was a queen's dress for a sacrificial lamb. It's not too late, I whispered as we saw the lights of the town hall. We can run, head north. She squeezed my hand, her touch surprisingly strong. And live as fugitives? No, Pa. We face this with our heads high, like Mother would have wanted. The town hall was lit up like a star fallen from the sky. Inside, a string quartet was playing, and tables overflowed with food and drink. It was a vulgar display of wealth in a town where most were a week away from starving. Crawford met us at the door, taking Elizabeth's hand and kissing it. You look exquisite, he said, his eyes crawling over her. He tucked her arm in his and paraded her through the room, introducing her to his cronies. I saw the way they looked at her, not with admiration, with assessment, like they were judging horseflesh. A cold dread began to crawl up my spine. This was worse than I imagined. Then Crawford led her to a small raised platform at the front of the room. An auction block. It was an auction block. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an engagement. It was a spectacle of humiliation. Gentlemen, Crawford's voice boomed, silencing the room. "I've invited you here to witness a most advantageous arrangement." I surged forward, but Blackwood and another goon blocked me. "The Hayes family has fallen on difficult times," Crawford continued, enjoying every word. "And in the spirit of community, I've offered to assume their considerable debts in exchange for this lovely young woman's hand in marriage." He paused for effect, letting the murmurs ripple through the crowd. "However, in fairness to Miss Hayes, I've decided to entertain competing offers. After all, she deserves the very best match possible." The room erupted. Elizabeth stood frozen on the platform, her face a mask of stone. But I could see the horror in her eyes. He wasn't just taking her. He was showing everyone that he could outbid any other man for her. It was the ultimate display of his power. "The starting bid," Crawford announced, his voice dripping with triumph, "is $5,000, the exact amount of the Hayes debt. Do I hear a higher offer?" The bidding started. 5,500 from some old freight hauler. 6,000 from a cattle baron. Each bid was a hammer blow against my soul. I struggled against the men holding me, shouting Crawford's name, but my voice was lost in the noise. 8,000! Crawford bid himself, silencing the room. He turned to the crowd, a conquering king. "Gentlemen, I believe Miss Hayes will find no better offer than—" Boom! The rear doors of the hall flew open with the force of a thunderclap. Every head spun around, and a figure strode down the center aisle. It was Swift River, but not the man from the trading post. He was dressed in the full regalia of a Lakota warrior. Buckskin leggings, a bone breastplate, a single eagle feather in his long black hair. A knife and a revolver hung at his waist. He was a vision of righteous fury from another world. The room fell into a dead, shocked silence. Women gasped. Men reached for their guns. Crawford's face turned purple with rage. "What is the meaning of this? Remove this savage immediately." Swift River ignored him. His dark eyes were fixed only on Elizabeth, who stared back, her expression a mixture of terror and a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. He stopped in the middle of the room. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but it cut through the silence like a razor. $10,000. The silence in that hall was so deep, you could have heard a feather drop. $10,000. It was an impossible sum, more money than most men in that room would see in a lifetime. Crawford, for the first time, looked utterly stunned. He sputtered, "This is a private gathering. Your kind isn't welcome here, Black Hawk." Swift River finally turned his gaze on Crawford, and the contempt in his eyes was a physical force. "I see nothing respectable about men who trade women like horses." He reached into a pouch at his waist, pulled out a heavy leather bag, and tossed it onto a nearby table. It landed with a solid, heavy thud. The drawstring came loose, and a river of raw gold nuggets spilled across the white tablecloth, glittering like captured stars under the chandelier light. $10,000, Swift River repeated, his voice echoing in the stillness. "In gold. Double your debt." He looked past Crawford, straight at me. "Hayes, unless you prefer your daughter go to a man who speaks of honor while behaving like a thief." The crowd was buzzing now, a low, dangerous hum. Crawford's face was a mask of pure hatred. "This is absurd. No one would allow a white woman to be claimed by him." "I thought that was the purpose of this auction," Swift River said, the way he said the word auction, making it sound like the filthiest curse imaginable. "The highest bidder wins." And then Elizabeth moved. She stepped down from that cursed platform, her green dress rustling, and walked right through the crowd until she stood between Swift River and Crawford. "My daughter. My brave, strong daughter." "I have no intention of being claimed by anyone," she said, her voice trembling but clear as a bell for all to hear. "This entire arrangement was to settle my father's debt. Nothing more." Swift River gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod of respect. "Then allow me to settle it, with no claim on you." Crawford was losing control. He signaled to Blackwood and his men, who started moving forward, their hands on their guns. Swift River didn't draw his own weapons, but his body coiled, ready. "Sheriff Miller, arrest this man!" Crawford shrieked. The sheriff, a man who'd been enjoying Crawford's free liquor by the refreshment table, shuffled forward reluctantly. On what charge, Marshal? Offering money at your auction? He's carrying weapons. And that gold is undoubtedly stolen. Swift River didn't even flinch. The gold was traded fairly for furs. As for weapons, I count 17 armed men in this room, including yourself, Crawford. Will you arrest them all? Elizabeth seized the moment. Mr. Crawford, she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength, you arranged this to settle my father's debt. This man has offered more than enough to clear it. By your own terms, our arrangement is concluded. I finally broke free from the goons holding me and stood beside her. My daughter's right. You've been outbid fair and square. Take the gold and consider our account settled. Crawford looked like he was about to order a massacre right there in the town hall, but there were too many witnesses. Even for him, it was a step too far. He forced his face into a sickening smile. Very well. The debt is cleared. Then his eyes locked on Swift River, and the smile vanished. But remember, Black Hawk, this territory has laws, and they are strictly enforced. I know your laws, Crawford, Swift River replied, his voice dangerously quiet. Better than you know mine. He turned to us. You should leave now. This place is no longer safe. We got out of there, the eyes of the entire town burning into our backs. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. It felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Swift River joined us on the street. That gold, I started, not knowing what to say. I can't accept. You can, and you will, he cut me off, his tone leaving no room for argument. Not for my sake, for hers. He nodded toward Elizabeth. Crawford will not forgive this. He will look for other ways to claim what he believes is his. Elizabeth shivered. We both knew he was right. Why? She asked, her voice soft. Why would you do this for strangers? Swift River was silent for a moment. 6 winters ago, he said, his gaze distant, sickness came to my people. The government agent refused us medicine. A rancher allowed us to hunt on his land. He brought blankets for our children. He looked directly at me. You may not remember this kindness, Hayes, but my people do. My mother was one of those who survived because of your aid. The Lakota do not forget debts of honor. I remembered. The winter of 72. A small band, their children coughing, their faces gaunt. A small kindness I'd almost forgotten had just saved my entire world. Just then, the town hall doors burst open and Crawford came storming out with his men. We should go, Swift River said, melting back into the shadows between the buildings. We scrambled into our wagon and I whipped the horses, not looking back until the lights of Clearwater were just a bitter memory behind us. As we crested the hill, I didn't see the 3 riders who pulled away from the tree line, following us at a distance. Crawford wasn't letting us go that easily. The war had just begun. Dawn had barely broken when the riders came. I saw them from the porch, 3 of them, with Samuel Blackwood in the lead. I grabbed my shotgun from beside the door just as my father came out of the barn. He stood in the yard, a silent sentinel between them and our home. What business do you have here, Blackwood? Pa asked, his voice like gravel. Blackwood smiled, that thin, ugly smile of his. Just delivering a message from Mr. Crawford. He remains concerned about your daughter's welfare. My daughter's welfare is no longer his concern, Pa shot back. Mr. Crawford disagrees, Blackwood said, his eyes flicking to me. He believes you may have been unduly influenced by that savage Black Hawk. In fact, he's offered a reward for information on the Indians' whereabouts. Seems he's suspected of other crimes. I stepped off the porch, my hands clenched into fists. Swift River committed no crime. Perhaps, Blackwood said with a shrug, but harboring a wanted man, that would be a crime. If he should turn up here, for instance. The threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. We have no idea where he went, Pa said. Now leave my property. Blackwood tipped his hat in a mocking gesture. Just a friendly warning, Hayes. Crawford doesn't take kindly to being humiliated. He'll be watching this place. He reined his horse around, but paused. Oh, and he mentioned the territorial tax assessor will be reviewing property values out here soon. Seems some folks might be significantly underpaying. With that final twist of the knife, they rode away. Crawford wasn't just coming for us. He was coming for our land, our livelihood, from every direction at once. The day passed in a haze of fear. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching riders. That evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, I saw him, a lone figure on horseback, approaching from the west, from the wilderness. He moved with a familiar, fluid grace. "Pa," I called softly. "He's come back." We met him at the edge of the yard. He'd changed back into the practical clothes of a frontiersman. "You shouldn't be here," Pa told him immediately. "Crawford's men are watching. There's a bounty on your head." Swift River nodded, unsurprised. "I expected as much. That is why I bring you this." He pulled a folded document from his saddlebag and handed it to my father. Pa unfolded it. His eyes went wide. This is a deed of sale for the eastern parcel, the one with the spring. It's made out to you. James Blackhawk." He looked up, his face a mask of confusion. "I don't understand." "Crawford wants your water rights," Swift River explained, his voice low and urgent. "That was his true prize all along. Not you," he said, looking at me, "but the power that comes with controlling the only reliable water source in the county. With your ranch and that spring, he would control everything." The sheer cold-bloodedness of Crawford's plan was staggering. It was never about the debt. It was about absolute power. "But why would you buy this land?" Pa asked. "And how?" "The eastern parcel connects your ranch to the territory still used by my people," Swift River said. "If I own it legally, by the white man's law, Crawford has no legitimate way to stop my people from accessing the water. It creates a buffer zone and an alliance." The genius of it hit me all at once. It was a shield, a fortress made of paper and law. "My people need safe passage," Swift River continued. "You need protection from Crawford. We can provide it for each other." "His full wrath is already coming for us," I said. "At least now we have a fighting chance." Pa looked from the deed to Swift River, his old prejudices warring with the reality of the man standing before him. "Why risk yourself further for us?" Swift River's gaze met mine for a brief, intense moment before he answered my father. "My father taught me that bridges between worlds are fragile things, but without them, neither world can thrive. The future will belong to those who can walk in both with honor." His words were cut short by the sound of approaching horses. Many horses, coming fast. "Crawford's men," Pa said, his voice tight with alarm. "They must have spotted you." "You have to go," I urged Swift River. "If they find you here—" "I will not run," he said, his expression hardening. "Running only convinces men like Crawford that intimidation works." The riders were visible now, a posse of at least 6 men, with Blackwood and Sheriff Miller at the head. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. This was it, the confrontation Crawford wanted. Pa made a split-second decision. "The barn," he hissed at Swift River. "There's a root cellar under the floor. Hide." Swift River hesitated, his warrior's pride warring with common sense. "Plea," I whispered. He gave a sharp nod and disappeared into the barn just as the posse thundered into our yard. "Hayes!" Blackwood shouted, his voice full of false authority. "We know Blackhawk is here. Surrender him now." Pa stood his ground in front of the house, his shotgun held loosely at his side. I stood on the porch behind him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What's all this about, Sheriff?" Pa called, ignoring Blackwood. "Since when does the law ride onto private property without cause?" Sheriff Miller looked uneasy. "We have information he was seen heading this way, Thomas. He's wanted for questioning about that gold. Several miners have reported thefts. A convenient lie, a perfect trap. We need to search the property, Hayes," Miller said, his eyes avoiding ours. "You have no warrant," Pa countered, his voice ringing with defiance. "You have no evidence. You have nothing but Crawford's spite." The standoff was a powder keg waiting for a spark. But then another sound. More horses coming from the direction of town. Reinforcements for Crawford's thugs, I thought, my stomach clenching in despair. But the riders who emerged from the dust cloud were not Crawford's men. At their head was Judge Nathaniel Chambers, the circuit court judge, and behind him rode 4 grim-faced U.S. Marshals. Blackwood's face went pale. Sheriff Miller looked like he'd just seen a ghost. The game had just changed, and the look on Judge Chambers' face told me he wasn't here to play. Judge Chambers swung down from his horse with the solid authority of a man who was the law itself. He was stout, with iron gray hair, and his eyes missed nothing. "Sheriff Miller," he boomed, his voice accustomed to filling courtrooms, "I'm surprised to find you engaged in what appears to be an unauthorized search of private property." The sheriff snatched his hat off his head. "Just following up on reports, Your Honor, of a wanted man." "Wanted by whom exactly?" the judge shot back. "I don't recall signing any warrants in this county today." Blackwood tried to step in, smooth as ever. "There have been reports of gold theft, Your Honor. We have reason to believe James Blackhawk—" "Interesting," Judge Chambers cut him off, fixing Blackwood with a stare that could freeze fire. "Because I've spent the day reviewing certain banking records from Clearwater, and they suggest a different kind of theft has been taking place. One involving fraudulent foreclosures and the manipulation of property records." He turned to my father. "Mr. Hayes, I believe you recently received a foreclosure notice from Crawford's Bank?" "Yes, Your Honor," Pa said, his voice full of disbelief. "So I've heard," the judge said with a thin smile, "through a rather unorthodox auction." His gaze softened as it fell on me. "Miss Hayes, I hope you weren't too distressed by Mr. Crawford's theatrical approach to debt collection." Before I could answer, another group of riders appeared, thundering toward us from town. This time it was Crawford himself at the lead, his face a mask of fury. The judge sighed. "Right on cue." Crawford skidded his horse to a halt, his eyes blazing. "What is the meaning of this intrusion, Judge? This is a local matter." "Human trafficking disguised as a debt settlement is a federal matter, Mr. Crawford," the judge said calmly, pulling a folded document from his coat. "I have here a sworn affidavit from 3 witnesses describing last night's event. Perhaps you'd like to explain your innovative approach to banking to the federal authorities." The color drained from Crawford's face. He tried to recover, to bluster his way through. "You're overstepping your jurisdiction, Judge. The territorial governor asked me to investigate reports of corruption in this region personally," the judge replied coolly. "And what I've found is a cesspool with you right at the center of it, Mr. Crawford." The barn door creaked open, and Swift River stepped out into the fading light. He walked with a calm, deliberate purpose, right into the middle of the storm he had created. "I am here," he said simply. "There is no need to pressure the Hayes family." Crawford's men tensed, but one of the U.S. Marshals spoke, his voice flat and deadly. "The next man who draws a weapon without my order will be shot." Judge Chambers looked at Swift River not with hostility, but with interest. "Mr. Blackhawk, your intervention has caused quite a stir." "Judge Chambers," Swift River replied, his voice respectful. "We met 3 years ago at the treaty discussions with Walking Eagle's band." Recognition dawned on the judge's face. "Indeed. You served as translator." He turned to the stunned crowd. "Mr. Blackhawk is known to the federal court as a man of integrity." Crawford couldn't believe his ears. "You can't take the word of an Indian over a respected businessman." "I take the word of honest men over dishonest ones, regardless of their heritage," the judge snapped. "And I have significant evidence of your dishonest practices, Mr. Crawford, including a systematic scheme to manipulate water rights across 3 counties. My gaze shot to Swift River. He had been right all along. It was always about the water. Crawford's empire of lies was crumbling around him. He tried one last, desperate ploy, turning to Swift River. "This is about that eastern parcel, isn't it? I'll double whatever you paid for it." "The land is not for sale," Swift River said, his voice like stone. Crawford's eyes blazed with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Do you think this changes anything? Indians don't hold property for long in this territory. There are ways—" "That's quite enough, Mr. Crawford," the judge interrupted. He nodded to the marshals. "Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Crawford and Mr. Blackwood back to town. They are to be placed under federal arrest." As the marshals led a sputtering, threatening Crawford away, the rest of his posse seemed to evaporate into the landscape. Sheriff Miller tried to make his excuses to the judge. But Chambers cut him off with a look of utter disgust. "Save it for your deposition, Sheriff." In the sudden quiet, the world seemed to hold its breath. Judge Chambers turned to us, a genuine smile on his face. "My apologies for the drama. We've been building a case against Crawford for months. Your auction provided the final piece of the puzzle." "How did you even know?" and I asked. The judge's eyes twinkled. "Not everyone in Clearwater is on Crawford's payroll. Good people are willing to stand against corruption." He looked at Swift River. "Though few with your particular flair for public confrontation." As the judge and his remaining marshals prepared to leave, he gave us one final warning. "Crawford is under arrest, but his influence remains. His allies will not take this lying down. I suggest you remain vigilant." He glanced between me, my father, and Swift River. "And perhaps maintain your unconventional alliance. It seems to have served you well." When they were gone, we were left standing in the yard, the dust settling around us. The immediate danger was over, but a new uncertain future stretched before us. My father cleared his throat. "I suppose we should discuss this alliance," he said, gesturing toward the house. "Perhaps over supper." A ghost of a smile touched Swift River's lips. "I would be honored." As we walked toward the house, the first stars began to appear. An alliance, a rancher, his daughter, and a Lakota warrior against the corrupt powers of the territory. It was impossible. It was madness. But as I looked at Swift River, a man who had walked out of the wilderness and into a firestorm for a debt of honor, I realized something. The impossible had already happened. Now we just had to survive it. In the weeks that followed, a new rhythm took hold at the Hayes Ranch. It wasn't just our ranch anymore. It was something more. A sanctuary. An outpost. The alliance Swift River had spoken of took root in the dusty soil. Members of his band began to appear, not as beggars or threats, but as partners. They helped repair fences broken by years of neglect, their knowledge of the land proving invaluable. In exchange, they had safe passage and access to the life-giving water on the eastern parcel Swift River now legally owned. But peace was a fragile thing. Crawford was in federal custody, but his shadow still loomed large. His cronies in Clearwater made sure we felt it. Supplies we ordered from town would get lost. People who used to greet my father with a friendly nod now crossed the street to avoid him. We were isolated, an island in a sea of hostility. Then one morning, the real trouble began. I was on top of the windmill, making repairs, when I saw the dust cloud. A dozen riders, maybe more, coming from town. And they were riding fast. "Pa!" I yelled. By the time I scrambled down the ladder, my father was standing in the yard with his shotgun. The two Lakota men working with him, Running Fox and an older man named Stonehand, had already grabbed their rifles. They were Crawford's men. Blackwood was at the head of the posse. But there were new faces too. Hard-looking men, hired guns by the look of them. They reined in 50 yards from the house, spreading out in a menacing line. "That's far enough," Pa shouted. "State your business, Blackwood." Blackwood urged his horse forward, a sneer on his face. "We're here on official business, Hayes. Sheriff Miller has issued a warrant to search for stolen property." "Judge Chambers suspended Miller's authority," Pa shot back. "His warrants aren't worth the paper they're written on." Blackwood's smile was chilling. "Judge Chambers left for Bismarck this morning. Urgent business. Miller has resumed his duties." My heart went cold. The judge was gone. Our shield was gone. I stepped up beside my father, my own rifle in my hands. I'd learned to shoot as a girl, and I was a damn good shot. "You need a federal warrant to search this property now," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. Blackwood's eyes narrowed when he saw my rifle. "The warrant covers all Hayes property. We have information that stolen gold was used in that land transaction, making it null and void. It was all lies, a flimsy pretext to get on our land, to start a fight they knew we couldn't win. They outnumbered us 4-1. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Hayes," Blackwood said, his voice hardening. "Stand aside or we'll arrest you for obstruction." It was a trap. If we fought, we'd be killed or arrested. If we surrendered, they'd plant whatever evidence they needed and take everything. We were out of time, out of options. And then I heard it, a sound from the east. A single horse galloping faster than I'd ever seen a horse run. A lone rider flying across the plains like an arrow shot from a god's bow. It was Swift River. He had been gone for 3 days meeting with other Lakota leaders. He was supposed to be 100 miles away. Blackwood cursed his plan unraveling. "Stop him!" he ordered his men, but none of them moved, mesmerized by the sight of the warrior thundering toward them. Swift River didn't slow down until he slid his exhausted horse to a stop right between us and the posse, creating a living barrier. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Samuel Blackwood," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "conducting Sheriff Miller's business while he sits in a federal detention cell. Interesting." A ripple of confusion went through Blackwood's men. "What are you talking about?" Blackwood snarled. "Sheriff Miller was arrested this morning by U.S. Marshals," Swift River announced, his voice carrying to every man in the posse, "for conspiracy and evidence tampering. Judge Chambers didn't leave for Bismarck. He sent for reinforcements." He reached slowly into his saddlebag and pulled out a document. "This is a federal injunction prohibiting any action against the Hayes property. The marshals are on their way here now." I rode ahead. He let his hand rest on the butt of his pistol. "I suggest you depart, unless you wish to join Crawford and Miller in federal custody." You could feel the tide turn. The hired guns looked at each other, their loyalty to Crawford's money suddenly outweighed by their fear of a federal prison. "Crawford ain't paying us enough to face federal charges. Blackwood," one of them spat, turning his horse. The posse disintegrated. Men started peeling away, leaving Blackwood sitting there, his face contorted with impotent rage. "This isn't over," he shrieked, wheeling his horse around. "Crawford has powerful friends. You haven't seen the last of us." He galloped away, a coward leading a scattered retreat. The dust settled. The immediate threat was gone. Swift River swayed in his saddle, his body finally admitting the cost of his ride. He had ridden through the night, a desperate, impossible race against time to save us. I rushed forward as he dismounted, grabbing his arm to steady him. He leaned on me for just a moment, and in that moment, something shifted. The alliance, the debt of honor, it was all still there. But beneath it, something new and fragile was taking root. Something personal. He had risked everything, not just for an alliance, but for us. For me. And looking into his exhausted eyes, I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I would have done the same for him. The war with Crawford was far from over. It was just entering a new, more dangerous phase. Inside, as Swift River drank water and ate, he told us the full story. Crawford had tried to bribe a federal auditor. It was a stupid, desperate move, and it had backfired spectacularly. Judge Chambers had used it to get broader authority, uncovering a massive conspiracy that implicated Sheriff Miller and several other officials. They weren't just trying to steal our ranch, they were trying to steal the entire county. "Crawford is arrested," Swift River said, his expression still grave. "But as Blackwood warned, he has connections. This is only a temporary peace." "Then we use the time we have," I said, a new fire in my belly. "We strengthen our position. We build this alliance so strong that not even Crawford's friends can break it." I looked him straight in the eye. "What did the other Lakota leaders say?" A rare smile touched his lips. "They have agreed. Grey Wolf and 3 other band leaders will arrive tomorrow to discuss the terms." The next day, the leaders of the Free Lakota bands arrived. They were proud, wary men who had seen 1,000 promises from the white man turned to dust. My father, to his credit, met them not as a conqueror, but as an equal. He laid out a formal agreement, a partnership based on shared resources and mutual respect. We would provide legal protection and access to markets. They would provide their deep knowledge of the land, their skills as hunters and trackers, and their manpower. We would build something new together, something that had never existed before. As my father talked business with the elders, Swift River and I stood apart. The silence between us was no longer awkward. It was filled with unspoken things. "You could have been killed today," I said, the words catching in my throat. "As could you," he replied, his gaze soft. "Standing beside your father with that rifle. That's different. This is my home." He moved a little closer, and the space between us seemed to crackle with energy. "When I rode away from this place," he said, his voice low, It felt like I was leaving something essential behind. I have spent my life between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Here, here I see the possibility of a future that reconciles those worlds. A future with someone who sees me not as a savage or a curiosity, but simply as a man. My heart hammered in my chest. In my old life, courtship was a game of shy glances and coded words. This was something else entirely. Raw, honest, real. People would oppose such a future, I whispered, the practical fears rising up, from both our worlds. Yes, he agreed, the path would not be easy. Then why consider it at all? My father was told it was impossible to love my mother, he said. He found a happiness worth any price. What we are building here, Lakota and settlers as allies, they say this is impossible too. Perhaps the impossible is simply the first step toward a different future. Before I could find the words to answer, the U.S. Marshals arrived, the reinforcements Judge Chambers had promised. Their presence was a comfort, a solid sign that for now the law was on our side. But as I watched them talk with my father, my mind was still reeling from Swift River's words. An impossible future. A few weeks ago, my future was a loveless, terrifying marriage to Marshall Crawford. Now it was a canvas waiting to be painted, filled with danger and uncertainty, but also with a breathtaking, terrifying hope. That evening, as the sun set, I watched my father and Swift River walking the property line, planning a new irrigation ditch. An old rancher and a Lakota warrior, talking not of war, but of water and growth. They were the architects of our impossible future. I stepped off the porch and walked to join them. Whatever came next, I would face it standing with them. I was no longer a prize to be auctioned. I was a woman who had found her voice, her strength, and her own path. And it was a path that, against all odds, was beginning to merge with that of the warrior who had saved me. Autumn arrived, painting the plains in brilliant strokes of gold and amber. 3 months had passed. 3 months of hard work, fragile peace, and constant vigilance. The Hayes-Lakota Alliance, as some in town were starting to call it, was no longer just an idea. It was a reality. A small Lakota encampment now stood in a sheltered draw on the northern edge of our property. We had built a meeting hall together, a solid structure of timber and hope, where the Alliance Council met to plan our future. Swift River and I had fallen into a rhythm, working side by side, our unspoken feelings a quiet current running beneath the surface of our busy days. The bond between us had deepened, forged in shared struggle and mutual respect. The outside world, however, was not content to leave us be. One crisp morning, the new interim sheriff, a young man named Mark Wilson, rode out from town. Samuel Blackwood is back, he told us, his face grim, and he's not alone. 3 men from Chicago, lawyers they say, but they carry themselves like hired guns. They've been asking questions all over town about your property deeds and the federal protection order. We knew this was Crawford's next move. If he couldn't break us with force, he would try to break us with the law. His lawyers descended on the Territorial Land Office, digging for any loophole, any weakness. They began pressuring other ranchers, spreading lies and fear, claiming our alliance set a dangerous precedent. Then came the news that the territorial governor himself was coming to Clearwater. He wanted to see our arrangement for himself. The governor has not been a friend to my people, Swift River said, his voice tight. This could be a disaster. Or it could be our salvation, my father countered. If he sees what we've accomplished, he might give us official recognition. The week before the governor's visit was a frenzy of activity. We worked day and night to ensure everything was perfect, to show him that our alliance wasn't a threat, but a model for a new kind of future. The night before he was scheduled to arrive, a lone rider appeared out of the darkness. It was Judge Chambers. He looked exhausted, having ridden hard from Bismarck. Crawford's associates have filed a petition with the Territorial Supreme Court, he announced without preamble. They're challenging the federal protection order and Mr. Blackhawk's right, as a non-citizen Indian, to own property. The legal trap had been sprung. My father was a U.S. citizen, Swift River stated, his voice cold as ice. My citizenship is legally established. And we will argue that, the judge said, but they are skilled at manipulating prejudice. They are requesting an emergency injunction to dissolve your alliance pending a full review. It was a brilliant, vicious move. They were trying to tear us apart before the governor even arrived. So the governor's visit is more important than ever, I said, my mind racing. He needs to see what we've built before they poison his mind. Precisely, the judge agreed. That night, after the judge and my father had gone to bed, Swift River and I were left alone in the parlor. The weight of it all was crushing. Whatever happens tomorrow, I said, needing to say the words out loud, I don't regret any of it. This alliance, it's shown me possibilities I never imagined. He reached out and took my hand. His touch was gentle, a quiet anchor in the storm. Among my people, he said, his voice soft, we speak of lives that intersect like rivers joining, separate waters becoming one current, stronger than either could be alone. The beauty of his words stole my breath. In that moment, the fear in the legal battles faded away, leaving only the profound, undeniable truth of the connection between us. The next morning, Governor Atkinson arrived with his entourage. He was a pragmatic, shrewd man, his eyes taking in every detail. The peaceful Lakota camp, the new meeting hall, the healthy cattle. He listened as my father explained how our joint operation had increased production. He listened as Swift River spoke of mutual benefit and shared destiny. I could see his skepticism slowly being replaced by a grudging respect. Over lunch in the meeting hall, the governor finally addressed the elephant in the room. I have received a copy of Mr. Crawford's petition to the court, he said, his gaze steady, along with letters from prominent cattlemen's associations expressing their concerns. And your impression of these concerns, Governor? Swift River asked directly. The governor was silent for a long moment. What you have created here is unorthodox, he said at last. Revolutionary, perhaps, but it appears to function, which is more than I can say for many of our current policies. A fragile hope began to bloom in my chest. I cannot interfere with the court, he clarified, but I can file a brief expressing the territorial government's interest in allowing innovative approaches to settler Indian relations, especially when they demonstrate economic benefits. It was more than we had dared to hope for. It was a fighting chance. As the governor's party rode away that afternoon, I stood beside Swift River, watching them go. The legal battle was far from over. The forces arrayed against us were still powerful, but something had shifted. We had shown what was possible, and the world, however reluctantly, was starting to take notice. We had built our impossible future on a foundation of shared trust, and now we would have to defend it in a court of law, fighting not with guns, but with deeds, documents, and the radical revolutionary idea that two peoples could choose to live together as partners instead of enemies. Winter fell upon the territory like a shroud. The blizzards came, burying the world in white, isolating us even further. But the work of the alliance continued. The real battle had moved from the dusty plains to the hushed courtrooms of Bismarck. Letters from Judge Chambers were our only lifeline to that world. He told us of legal maneuvers and delaying tactics. Crawford's lawyers were masters of the game, pushing the court hearing into the dead of winter, hoping the treacherous journey would prevent us from even attending. Then, one snow-swept afternoon, the elder Grey Wolf returned from a perilous journey to Fort Laramie. He brought news that changed everything. The federal government in Washington is drafting new policies, Swift River translated, his face grim as he relayed the elder's words to the Alliance Council. New regulations that would prohibit all Indians from conducting business or travel outside the reservations without an agent's approval. It was a death sentence for our alliance, a federal law that would make everything we had built illegal overnight. Crawford's lawyers must know about this, I said, the pieces clicking into place. They're delays. They're not just trying to win in court. They're trying to stall until this new law makes their case for them. The mood in the meeting hall was bleak. We had fought off hired guns and corrupt bankers, only to be crushed by a faceless bureaucracy 1,000 miles away. We were trapped. Then Swift River spoke. There is one path, he said, his voice cutting through the despair. If our alliance were to be formalized, not just as an agreement, but as a legal corporation under territorial law, before these regulations take effect. A corporation. The idea was audacious, unprecedented. A legal entity, I said, grasping the brilliance of it, that exists independently of its members, with the right to own property and conduct business. The government would have a harder time restricting an established business than it would restricting individual Lakota. The risks were enormous. We would be creating a legal target for every enemy we had, but it was our only hope. Judge Chambers rode through a blizzard to reach us, his dedication to our cause a beacon in the darkness. For 2 days, we huddled around the table in our ranch house, drafting the most unusual corporate charter the Dakota Territory had ever seen. The Hayes Lakota Cooperative Land and Cattle Company, a business with a soul, its charter codifying not just profit margins, but cultural autonomy and equal representation. It's revolutionary, the judge said, a look of admiration and concern on his face, and that's what makes it so vulnerable. He took our draft back to Bismarck, promising to file it and request expedited processing. Our fate now rested on a race against time. Could our corporation be legally born before the federal government passed the law that would strangle it in its cradle? The days crawled by. The winter winds howled outside, a constant reminder of the forces we were up against. One evening, I found Swift River staring out at the snow-covered land that was the heart of our struggle. "You have doubt," I said. It wasn't a question. "No doubts," he replied, his voice heavy. "Simply an awareness of the forces aligned against us. Crawford is just one man. We are fighting a system that benefits from keeping our worlds separate." I moved to stand beside him. "When I stood on that auction block," I said softly, "I believed my future was over. You showed me that we can choose our own path. Now I'm asking you to believe the same, that we can shape what comes next." He finally turned to look at me, and the stoicism in his eyes softened. "The corporation is a means, not an end," he said. "If it fails, we find another path." Together, I added, the single word a vow. He took my hand, his grip firm and warm. Together. In that moment, standing together against the vast, unforgiving winter, I knew that the true foundation of our alliance wasn't a corporate charter or a legal document. It was the simple, unbreakable bond between two people from different worlds who had chosen to face the storm together. We had thrown our last desperate gambit onto the table. Now all we could do was wait and pray that the wheels of justice in a distant capital would turn in our favor and not grind our impossible dream to dust. Spring arrived, melting the snow and turning the prairie green with new life. It had been 1 year. 1 year since the auction. 1 year since my world had been turned upside down, shattered, and rebuilt into something stronger and more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. Then one bright morning they came. Judge Chambers, Sheriff Wilson, and a third man, an aide to the governor. They brought news. The man from the governor's office cleared his throat, holding an official document. "By a vote of 4-1, he announced, the Territorial Supreme Court has upheld the legal standing of the Hayes Lakota Cooperative Land and Cattle Company, rejecting all challenges to its incorporation." The words hung in the air for a moment before they sank in. We had won. My father let out a whoop of joy. Judge Chambers was beaming. "They upheld everything," he said. "The majority opinion specifically cited the economic benefits of your arrangement in the governor's supporting brief." I looked at Swift River. The quiet pride in his eyes was more rewarding than any legal victory. "And the federal regulations?" I asked, almost afraid to hope for more. "Governor Atkinson has been in communication with the Department of the Interior," the aide replied. "Based on the success of your cooperative, they've agreed to exempt established business entities with Indian participation from the new regulations." It was a total victory. We had faced down the money, the power, and the prejudice, and we had won. The news spread like wildfire. Our Lakota partners emerged from their homes, their faces alight with a hope that had been denied them for generations. Our neighbors, the ones who had cautiously supported us, rode over to celebrate. Even Sheriff Wilson, who had once come to arrest Swift River, stood in our yard, shaking my father's hand with genuine respect. Crawford, we heard, had not taken it well. He was facing a long prison sentence for his crimes, a broken man whose empire had turned to ash. As an impromptu celebration erupted around a bonfire that evening, Swift River came to stand beside me, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. Gray Wolf wishes to perform a ceremony, he said quietly, to bind our communities in the Lakota tradition. Now that the white man's law has recognized our alliance. More than that, he continued, his voice dropping lower. Among my people, such ceremonies also acknowledge bonds between individuals. The unspoken question hung between us. It was a question that had been building for a year. Through every crisis, every victory, every shared glance across a crowded room. Is that what you want? I asked, my heart in my throat. I have walked between worlds my entire life, he said, his gaze intense. Here, we have created something that honors both paths. What I want is to continue walking this new path with you beside me. The world around us seemed to fade away. There was only the fire, the stars, and the simple, profound truth of his words. This was our impossible future. It was real. Then we will walk it together, I replied. A year ago, I was property, a bargaining chip in a rich man's game. My future was a prison. Tonight, I stood as a leader of a community, a partner in a revolutionary enterprise, and I was looking at a future of boundless possibility. The journey had been a trial by fire, but it had forged something unbreakable. A community, a partnership, a love that had bridged two worlds. It all started on an auction block, with a desperate gamble and a warrior's defiant bid. It started with an injustice, but it ended with a new beginning, a testament to the fact that even in the harshest of lands, the most revolutionary thing you can build is a bridge. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, you're going to love the two stories waiting for you right on your screen. They're packed with the same kind of twists and turns you won't see coming. Click on one of them now, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible tale.